And welcome to Salt City Hoops once again. My name is Mark Pereira here, coming to you live from a different look. And now as I'm speaking, I'm realizing it sounds a little bit different in here. You're looking at a new wall behind me because I have recently completely redone the office space in which I do this fine podcast, including the carpet and the walls and everything. So everything is taken off the walls right now. But the new carpet, I'm realizing the old crusty shag carpet that was in this room for so long has been replaced with the nice modern plush carpet. It's still carpet, but I'm feeling quite. As soon as I start speaking, my deeper tenor voice is reverberating throughout the room with less things in the room. I'm a music guy myself, so I'm realizing that there's less stuff in the room absorbing the sound. It's bouncing off of everything. So we'll see how this sounds when we get finished. But also, I got nothing behind me, so this is the lighting in here is all off now. But I was still trying to make sure that we keep up on all our fun Utah Jazz activities, and especially right before the trade deadline. So I said I gotta set up the podcast set up here today. Get you some thoughts on recent Utah Jazz activities. Once again, Salt City Hoops. My name is Mark Pereira. Happy to be here today. We're gonna talk about a few things. I think the two player things, and then I can't help myself. We're still a few days away from the trade deadline, and our next episode next week will be a full trade deadline recap, not only for the Jazz, and maybe the Jazz will be super active and give us several hours of content, but I don't foresee like a huge trade deadline for the Jazz, even though I'm kind of pining for them to be stealth buyers. But perhaps we'll talk about some other teams as well and how that shapes Utah's trajectory going forward. But leading up to it, I think it's worth just kind of putting players out there that you all have mentioned in comments and posts, and but also seeing who more media people are talking about as trade structure kind of candidates. And I will continue to insist that the way that the Jazz move forward from here with Keontae Lowry and probably Walker Kessler as kind of your tentpoles, and hopefully, mega hopefully for Ace Bailey, you add a top 5 or top 6 pick coming into this upcoming draft who in 2-3 years becomes a quality player, maybe sooner, but usually rookies aren't impactful right away. You need to bring in the base of the team, the rotation spots 4 through 12. A number of those players might be on the roster right now, but we've frankly had a disappointing season from a number of second and third year guys. So we have to look at how do we build a team from here. So some of these really tiny little trade maneuvers can turn into rotation spots. And what is a salary dump for one team could actually be a chance for Utah to take that player in, eat the last year, 2-3 years of his contract while the team isn't too expensive, and maybe he's only 26, 27, 20 years old, and it kind of makes sense with the trajectory of the team. So that's kind of what I'm going to look for, but also some sexier names we'll talk about for the trade. First, we got to talk about the man of the hour, Jusuf Nurkic. I believe the last time we spoke, he had just finished his 2 straight triple-doubles, but now he completed a 3rd straight triple-double. And I don't think that's happened before in Jazz history. If it has, it happened back in the 70s or early 80s, or definitely probably the 70s during the Pete Maravich era. And the last time we spoke, I did implore you to watch Jusuf Nurkic as, yes, he'll have the ball in his hands, but watch everything else happening to try to figure out who he's going to throw the ball to. That's where the exciting deception comes in. And after having watched these games back and also reading, of course, our fine Salt City Hoops writer, Dan Clayton, our head honcho on some of his playbook analysis, I got to give the hats off not only for the Jazz to sort of like reinvent their offense for a little bit without Lauri Markkanen. But I got to give a ton of credit to the overall team, and I think a lot of this goes on the players. Obviously, it's a coaching first initiative, but for the players to deploy a whole lot of new concepts and a new style of play, like new specific, these are complicated play calls. These aren't just vibes based situations. Although certain of them are read and react things that surely and they've been playing with Nurkic since training camp. It's not like the stuff is completely brand new to them, but there were definitely like specific timing based play calls that they installed within the past couple weeks, past month, who knows, and they deployed them flawlessly. There were a few turnovers here and there, but in general, when you're watching all these off-ball actions, they are precise. They were creative. They were really fun to watch. And if your eyes weren't glued to Jusuf Nurkic palming the ball way up here for a couple seconds and watching all the gobbledygook that's happening around to spring someone free, I was constantly guessing wrong who was going to be the recipient of a Nurkic pass. Dan highlighted one that I specifically remember as something that completely threw me off, and the timing of it I didn't predict. I totally missed the analysis of. There's basically a whole lot of actions going on, but then the Jazz decide to fake a Cody Williams screen. So Cody Williams is setting a screen for Keontae George, who is probably going to walk into a dribble handoff with Nurkic. Instead, Cody Williams, as soon as he's about to set the screen, he just darts right to the rim. And the entire thing was designed. Keontae George is running behind him to make it look like he was going to take the dribble handoff. And some of that could be a little ready and reacty, but the way that Cody darted to the rim was very intentional. I think it was very much a timing-based thing. And Nurkic found him with ease, and Cody Williams got a layup. We're going to talk about Cody Williams in a second. Because he's the second guy I think we should highlight in this month of January. Get to Cody in a minute. First, I want to mention there's been some haranguing in the broader NBA sphere, and especially in the fantasy basketball sphere that I find myself in often, about the player participation policy insofar it applies to Jusuf Nurkic, right? So Jusuf Nurkic is starting to put up these big stat lines, and it's kind of taking people's attention. Like I'd like to use that guy in a gambling setup, or I'd like to use that guy in fantasy basketball. Is he important or exciting enough to draw the NBA's attention? Objectively not, right? I mean, it is kind of a cool story that he's been able to start and play pretty well this year. He's certainly put up some clunkers. He put up a clunker against Golden State. The entire team put up a clunker against Golden State, so can't take too much away from that. But in case you're sitting there wondering, how can the Jazz get away with just not playing Nurkic some nights, right? And he has been active in resting on the bench a couple times, right? So he didn't even get a chance to wear one of his gaudy suits on the bench. But I think this nasty flu nonsense has really ravaged the team this year. And Nurkic threw up at halftime during one of his triple-double games. So I think he's legitimately sick. I don't think they held him out of the previous game for nonsense. But there have been a number of games where, like I said, he's just sitting on the bench. And is that a way to get around the player participation policy? Couple things. One, the player participation policy does not apply to Jusuf Nurkic or Svi Mykhailiuk, for that matter, who has also been an active resting DNP coach's decision. It only applies to star players. And the definition of star players is written out in the policy. Basically, you had to have made an all-star game or all-NBA team or such in the past few years. Lauri Markkanen has done so. So I'm sure that the Jazz were keeping the NBA well informed of Lauri Markkanen's illness status, his return to conditioning status, his random rest game against the Nets, that one might have gotten close to drawing the ire of the NBA. Because Lowry doesn't have a specific injury. It's a return to conditioning kind of illness, and he got a rest day out of it. And it was a home game. And the NBA tends to frown more on resting for away games than home games. But that one was they must have had advanced communication with the NBA to make sure that they didn't get fined for resting Lowry. But Jusuf Nurkic doesn't apply here. But I do think it's notable to talk about Nurkic resting because there is just a notable deflating of performance when Nurkic, and Kevin Love for that matter, but mainly when Nurkic isn't playing. The defense is not affected by Nurkic one way or another, actually. Like, the stats bear out that it really just doesn't matter who's playing center. As far as the points allowed per game, I will say I think the defense, there's more structure to it, and it's more predictable in the ways that they fail with Nurkic out there, whereas when you got Kyle Filipowski or Kyle Anderson playing center out there, they're taking a lot more chances. And it's just not a very structured defense. So having Nurkic out there, it doesn't help the defense statistically, but I think it's good for coaching young players. Offensively, it's a mess without Nurkic on the floor. And so I kind of like to see Nurkic out there to help the younger players learn a little bit and play a little bit better. But at the same time, I also, I'm on the side of it. As much as I've railed against people being, oh, the team is winning too much, rest Lowry more. I've really loathed the constant din in my ear of people shouting that. I mean, I'd prefer the team get a better draft pick. Let's be clear. And if I'm very much in favor of finding the strategic ways to lose a game here or there, especially against the bad teams, like losing at home against the Nets because you didn't play Nurkic and Lowry and I think Kevin Love was also out for that game. Svi played, which was interesting. So that's a bonus loss for Utah. So when is Jusuf Nurkic going to play? I think that's a normal question for people to have. When is Jusuf Nurkic going to play? That's really what's driving a lot of the national people or just regular fans who are interested in this performance. They seem to have a mystery. When is Jusuf Nurkic going to play? Here's your general rule of thumb. If the Jazz are playing a good team, he will play. It's a general rule of thumb. I'm sure, the next time, we're playing the Raptors on Sunday, I'm sure that's a good team. I'm sure he'll still have an illness by then, right? And fly in the face of my statements here. But anyways, if it's a good team, he'll play. If it's a bad team, if it's a really bad team, they're going to find a reason to rest him. Whether he's in active DNP or he's wearing a gaudy suit on the sidelines, they're going to give him a reason to rest. Because they can be a lot more aggressive with Nurkic's rest because he's not subject to the player participation policy. Now that Markkanen is fully healthy, the Jazz might not have any choice but to play him in most of the games unless they have a discussion with the NBA ongoing about his back, about his groin, whatever. He had a legitimate groin injury earlier in the year. So if the Jazz want to sit Markkanen, they have to have constant communication with the NBA. In fact, Section 5 of the player participation policy concerns, perhaps I'm getting too lawyerly dork here, so I'll move on to more cool stuff like Cody Williams here. But Section 5 of the player participation policy concerns what teams' obligations are for communication. And the communication obligations for a team actually goes beyond stars. The communication, I'm not going to spell it out because that's too annoyingly lawyerly, but it does apply to typical starters and stars, that the teams are obligated to have an ongoing communication with the NBA about when certain players, about their injuries, their rest status, who is eligible to rest, who is not. Because the reason starters gets mentioned in the communication aspect of this is okay, if we understand that we can't make all of your what the hell makes a typical starter anyways, right? But we can't make the participation policy subject to all typical starters. But if you want to have some sort of elaborate rest plan for your star, then at least give the fans a working vehicle to watch, right? Like a functional team to watch. So if the Jazz were resting Lowry and Jusuf Nurkic in the same game, or Lowry and Svi Mikhailiuk, again, what the hell makes a typical starter? I think Nurkic qualifies for that more than Mikhailiuk. The NBA is going to take a stricter view of like, why the hell are you resting Markkanen if Nurkic is also resting, right? So resting Nurkic is not a violation of anything, but resting Nurkic on games when you also want to rest Markkanen will draw the NBA's ire a little bit more strongly. So that's what they have to be careful of. And I think when the Jazz got fined last year for Markkanen resting, it wasn't because they rested Markkanen and Kessler, right? Kessler wasn't subject to that, although he did finish, he's a Rookie of the Year candidate, right? They got fined because the Jazz were straight up because the Jazz did not play Lauri Markkanen in a game that they deemed him to be insufficiently unhealthy. And the NBA got strict about it because they were also resting Kessler. So the NBA's discretionary power here is going to get greater if you're just resting your starters. So that's where I think Nurkic's rest comes into play. If you're a fantasy person, you're a gambler, whatever, your idea on Nurkic going forward should be good team, he's playing, bad team, he's probably not. And I think that also the same to a much stricter degree applies to Lauri Markkanen. As far as Jusuf Nurkic in the trade market and everything, I mentioned at the top of the show that I eventually need to start filling out roster spots 4 through 12 with quality players if you want to start winning games. And as I look at the backup center market across the NBA, and the Jazz have struggled finding a backup center for way too long now. Ed Davis and Jeff Green and Udoka Azubuike and Derek Favors as a backup center. Hassan Whiteside. I almost said Hasheem Thabeet, which I miss Hasheem Thabeet. I wonder what he's up to. Tony Bradley. I'm trying to bring up all the backup centers and give everyone some PTSD in the middle of a podcast about the Jazz teams of present, but I want Jusuf Nurkic back as a backup center, and it's plausible that other teams would be willing to give him more money or more of a role. You could see another bad team looking at his assist numbers and being like, man, we need someone to organize this a little bit better. If the Nets move on from Nick Claxton as part of their trade deadline mechanisms, would they want to bring in Nurkic as a center? Like, there's all these opportunities that might be available for him. And I've mentioned this on a couple of the shows, so I won't belabor it, but I think these triple doubles, just to put a finer pin on it, show that like there is, if Kessler has to miss time or whatever, there is a quality player here that I don't think should cost a lot of money that would really help shore up the meat of the rotation, right? And so as we get into trade discussions of Jusuf Nurkic's expiring $19 million salary and how that could be useful on some big fat salary dumps for some other teams, that comes with a cost of losing Jusuf Nurkic. That I'm not going to spill any tears over necessarily, but I think he'll be a not the easiest kind of guy to replace in free agency. You're going to be signing a random guy like Ed Davis again. I don't know. Also, I have no idea what Ed Davis is up to these days. So many Jazz backup centers end up never playing again in the NBA. Hassan Whiteside actually had a good backup center year for us. It wasn't like actually particularly good, but it was useful, and he was a facsimile of what Rudy Gobert can do. He never played another NBA minute again. I thought that was mildly surprising. He's also a head case that no one really wanted to be around. So, Jusuf Nurkic, cool guy. Hope he's around. If we trade him, I hope it's for like a real meaty thing. I have my own Jusuf Nurkic trade idea coming later. Cody Williams. boy, I have been definitive in my statements about Cody Williams that it's just not it. He will never, ever, ever be an NBA starter, let alone NBA rotation player. I have said that in these very words. If I'm wrong about Cody Williams, I'm willing to be wrong about Cody Williams and stand on my priors. I don't think enough people in my chair yelling at you stand on their priors enough. Their opinions change as things go, and I'm certainly willing to eat crow, right? And I hope I do. So at the same time, you got to give flowers where they're due. So I want to talk about Cody Williams' very positive month of January. And I'm sitting here, and it hasn't changed my opinion as I said, but it will change how I frame my discussion about Cody Williams probably. So I'll always be a Cody Williams hater, if you will, unless he just starts blowing up and doing other things. But the positive thing about Cody Williams in this month of January, I'm going to compare it to last year. So last year, his effective field goal percentage, which is your 2-point percentage and your 3-point percentage combined, but there's more weight given to your 3-point percentage because 3 points is 1.5 times 2 points, so why not give 1.5 times the weight to your 3-point percentage? It was 38.7% last year, which is, I don't need to be an advanced stats person to just tell you that is one of the very worst figures in the league. Like the non-NBA, you're not an NBA player there. Like second percentile. 99% of the league is better than you. This month he's up to 60.2% effective field goal percentage, which is very, very good. It's not spectacular, but it's like, oh, that's a starter. That's a good percentage. He hasn't made a single non-corner three this month. He might have made some non-corner threes in garbage time for some games. I'm using cleaning the glass stats here, so you're gonna have garbage time filtered out, which it's a lot of garbage time for the Jazz and a lot of garbage time featuring Cody Williams, to be sure. So, but let's stick to competitive moments here because I like to think those still matter, even if Cody Williams is playing during the meat of the game and during garbage time, because the young players are playing during garbage time. You want to see what it's like against the opponent's active rotation, right, and not just random players. So I still think even though that the minutes matter in the garbage time more for the Jazz than other teams, the non-garbage time I think is important. So he's 43% from the corners, mostly catch and shoot, right? Way better than it was. That's a quality number. We're also seeing the team figure out that Cody Williams, instead of making him shoot and miss some of those corner threes, he's cutting on a lot of those, and they're finding Jusuf Nurkic has found him on a lot of cuts. Last year he shot 53% of the rim. That's very, very, very bad. You're thinking, oh, over 50%, that's pretty good. At the rim is very bad. And how many times have we seen Cody Williams sprawl up, go flying at the rim for a layup or a dunk, and just get absolutely stuffed? It still happened a little bit in January. It was happening a lot at the beginning of this year, and it happened a preposterous amount last year of any time he would randomly decide to get aggressive, getting to the rim, and just never making the shot. And not just missing contested layups or whatever, he would never even have a prayer and get his shot stuffed, or he would sprawl to the ground, Dante Exum style. It just was not a pretty sight. And this month, all of a sudden, he is making contested dunks. He's making contested layups. He's not sprawling all over the floor after he gets contact. So it's not just that he's shooting 70% of the rim now, which is very good. That's a pretty good rim percentage. 7 out of 10 shots at the rim are going in. That's pretty good for a guard player, guard wingish player. And it's not just the confidence. I think last year our biggest criticism of Cody Williams was just he didn't do anything out there most of the time. And that's a death knell in the NBA. If you're a top 10 pick and you're just not even doing anything, I don't know. This is going to be a longer project than we thought, and this project is probably never going to end. And you like that his aggressiveness was a little bit higher to start the year, but like it just had no positive effects. And now this month of January, he's being quite picky about when he's being aggressive, but he's getting to the rim and converting. His 12% usage is very low. That's like Royce O'Neal numbers, right? So it's not like, oh, he's finishing a lot more plays in whatever. He's still a very, 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 very minor part of what any Jazz lineup is doing offensively, which is still kind of disappointing. You know, you kind of knew that you were drafting him as a connector type on offense. And it was a bad draft, so like he is more like the 20th pick in a regular draft. It just still was disappointing, right? And now I'm not unhappy to see him out there and see how he'll surprise me more. His steal rate is higher, his block rate is higher. He's kind of a paradox right now defensively where my eyes and your eyes, we see that he's blocking some shots. He's getting some more steals than he usually did. And we see him getting over screens better than he used to. We see him being smart defensively as far as never really being in the wrong spot. He never has his head turned and being like, oh, what happened to my guy? Like, no. He's got his head on straight defensively. He hasn't really had a chance to play. In this month, we've had no marketing, right? For basically this entire month. Not this entire month, but for a huge portion of it. And so there's a lot of games where he's starting without marketing, he's starting without Nurk. He's starting, right? I should mention that. I forgot to completely mention that he's starting. And defensively, the team is just dreadful for all of Cody Williams' minutes defensively. A little bit better offensively, but dreadful defensively. His most common lineup that he plays with is this recent starting group. Keontae George, Ace Bailey, Svi Mykhailiuk, Cody Williams, and Jusuf Nurkic. That team has a 134 defensive rating that would be absolutely just to the molten core of the earth basement terrible. And they're all of Cody Williams' most common lineups over the past, few months have been just dreadful. They look a lot better with Markkanen. I'm sure there's been a couple studies out here, or there's been some stats, people who have looked into this. I don't know off the top of my head. But I do believe in the principle pretty strongly that if your offense ends with the ball going through the net, it makes defense always going to be about 15% better. And the Jazz offense without Markkanen is just pretty bad. It's below 25th, right? Keontae George individually has really nice moments. He's still having a great season. But unless you have a top 5 player in the NBA, you can't run a heliocentric offense and have a good offense. So the Jazz rely on many other players to have a good offense, and they just don't have one without Markkanen also being up there to share the work with Nurkic, with Keontae, with Ace Bailey. Ace Bailey's had a nice couple weeks, by the way. Will Hardy had some extended praise for Ace Bailey recently. So I will pause my judgment on Cody Williams for some of the defensive lineups because the offense has also been pretty dreadful. But my eyes show like a player who is a good connector defensively. So, what is my reframe context then on Cody Williams? It kind of just goes back to his draft pedigree being not only the 10th pick of the draft. Sure, it was a bad draft, and I just said, like, oh, he might be 20th in a regular draft, but the Jazz were high on him as a top 5, a top 3 pick, perhaps. Drafting him over Reed Shepard, perhaps. Like, drafting him over so many other players. And so his fourth, so he's going into his third year next year, right? $7 million or $7.5 million will. We've already picked up his team option for next year, so he's there because you have to make those decisions in October. So all these first round rookies, they have 4-year contracts, 2 guaranteed years, and then 2 team option years. Going into the third year, which will be this fall for Cody, is when you have to decide if you're going to pick up his 4th-year option or give him an extension, right? You can after the season starts, you can start thinking about, all right, what does these extensions look like for him? There's we're gonna have some extension decisions to make with Keontae George. That'll be this summer, right? That's what happens between your 3rd and 4th years. But for Cody Williams, sorry if I'm not being clear about this, it'll be going. You can start thinking about what these extensions look like for Cody Williams after he finishes his 2nd year and going into his 3rd year and then into his 3rd year summer. This fall, they will have to decide if they want to pick up his 4th-year option too, though. Like, extension is one thing, but picking up his 4th-year option for another $7.7 million for not next year, but the year after, right? We're thinking far ahead. He has to finish this year strong, have a good offseason program, and have a good training camp so that by October 31st, 2026, the Jazz have a decision to make. Should we extend him, or should we pick up his 4th-year team option? And that's a really expensive team option. And so I worry about a situation like Zeke Nnaji, where Zeke Nnaji goes through the first 3 years of his tenure with Denver. He gets his 4th-year option picked up. And before he starts his 4th year of playing basketball, they give him a 3-year, $26 million contract or something like that. Which starts this year, I think. I think this is the first year of it. Before Jakob Poeltl signed his preposterous extension, carrying him into like his age 35 season or something, it was a crazy extension by Toronto. I called the Zeke Nnaji contract the worst contract in the NBA because he was an incredibly net negative player for Denver, and they gave him an extension for no reason. And when you're an expensive luxury tax championship contending team, the negative weight of having a single bad contract on your books is horrible because it costs you like double in luxury tax payments, right? Very complicated math to figure out, like, okay, what is your specific dollar amount that you have to pay in luxury tax? But every bad dollar of player is a very expensive luxury tax payment. So it was just absolute horrible for Denver. They're going to try to figure out how to perhaps loop Nnaji in on some sort of trades at the trade deadline. They can never find any buyers. Perhaps one of those buyers is Utah. But I worry about Utah getting into Zeke Nnaji type situations. The reason that extension was so awful is because Nnaji hadn't shown anything useful. And giving him an extension because you're thinking like, oh, he's finally going to figure it out, and we don't want him to get to restricted free agency, right? He's going to figure it out, and we want to get him on this bargain contract. You're negotiating against nobody there. And it's not like the completely preposterous number. Oh, you're thinking 3 years, $26 million. That's no big deal. But Denver is struggling with their books because of that contract. It's hampered some of what they've been able to do previously. So I worry about, okay, so if we picking up his option is one thing, and I think even that's still a sketchy proposition. But I will be on the floor if not only do we pick up his option, but we give him an extension. That is like a 3 year, now we're a couple years forward, so contract inflation. A 3 year, $45 million deal for Cody Williams? Based on what? And even if he improves, this will be my last thing on Cody Williams before I end with a more positive note. Even if he continues this January throughout this entire year, and you pick up his 4th-year option, because you're saying, he's worth the $7.5 million for his 4th year. A player of this archetype who is just kind of like a decent a Royce O'Neal type, like a low usage connector, defensive smarts guy. I'm not saying they're easy to find, but there are a lot of guys that you can use a mid-level exception on to say, hey, come fill out our rotation. You'll play 28 minutes, and we know what you can do. And betting in advance that Cody Williams will be a high-level rotation player to fill that 3-and-D role, although the 3-point percentage has got to be dialed in, man. And right now, his free throws suck too. Like, his 41% shooting that he had in college, it's like, who is this guy as a shooter? So he's more of like a slasher ND kind of guy. There's just a chasm of difference between, you're a $4-5 million a year player and a $15 million a year player and a $25 million a year player. And I worry that the Jazz will extend a guy betting that he'll become a $15 million a year player or more than that with a very limited sample size. I'd rather go into restricted free agency with a guy like that. Right? Thinking way far ahead. My positive note is I'm glad I'm having these discussions at all. I mean, I thought it wouldn't be until February, March, whatever, that I would have to be talking about Cody Williams minutes. Instead, he's playing minutes and earning them. These are earned minutes. He is playing better than Taylor Hendricks in the rotation. He is playing better than Walt Clayton Jr. in the rotation for what the team needs, right? I think there's a Collier-Clayton discussion that should be had. That's another podcast. But Cody Williams is playing good enough this month of January, and a lot of it without Lauri Markkanen, to show in legitimate basketball situations that it's making me have to reframe the context on why I'm such a hater. I hope he proves me wrong. I will have to eat a lot of garbage if he ends up being really good. And this is a sustained stretch of positive basketball play. Excited for what's next for Cody Williams. All right, let's talk trades. I love the trade deadline, in part because, you get to the offseason and the offseason is going to have some stuff. And, like, the offseason is also, though, the reason the offseason is kind of odd for as a basketball fan and team planning perspective is teams are limited with what they can do in free agency. And because teams just don't have a lot of cap space, you're adding the new apron structures, so teams are just spending in different ways or not. They have more limited ways to just straight up, I'm going to procure these free agents. And so, yes, the offseason becomes a hotter time for teams to really sit down and have in-depth conversations with other teams on how to reshape each other's rosters via trade because of the restrictions on signing free agents. I get that. But the reason the offseason can be a struggle, though, is because some of these announcements come out of nowhere. You don't know when they're going to happen. Take Utah trading Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, for instance. Like, those happen way later in the offseason. So it's kind of hard to, like, prepare and talk about it. Whereas the trade deadline, it's playoff teams are shoring up to say, like, who are we and what do we want to be this year, right? That's the point of having the trade deadline is, like, you can't be making trades in April and May. Like, you have to decide right now, what are you going to be? And the offseason is a better time for teams in the middle to make roster shifting moves and that sort of thing, because the teams in the middle know, well, we're not going to get a top draft pick, and hooray, we're going to finish ninth in the West. Who cares? That could be an accomplishment for some teams as they're trying to ascend up and everything. But, like, if you're Memphis or if you're Dallas or something like that, those teams have tanking potential, but maybe better examples are like Atlanta and Chicago. They have a lot more wins. They know they're not winning a title this year. So for them, it's more like, are there minor things we need to do to set up for the off seasons, and for the off season to be your more bigger transformations, whereas the bad teams like Utah can help the best teams shore up their championship run. So the most likely situation for Utah at the trade deadline, and I encourage you to listen to our trade deadline previews. I'll do some plugs later for what we talked about a couple weeks ago with Dan and Ken Clayton. But for now, I want to set up like our final pre-trade deadline analysis here. The most likely situation for the Jazz at the trade deadline is they simply take on an expiring contract dump that Utah ends up waiving or something like that. It's because Utah has the John Collins trade exception that Utah can be a cap space team right now if they really wanted to. Can't have one or the other, but for all intents and purposes, the Jazz can take on a shitload of money in a trade at the trade deadline. There are lots of teams trying to cut payroll. Unfortunately for the Jazz are not the only team that can help a team cut payroll. The Nets are out there. The Pistons want to add stuff, but like if Detroit really wanted to pick up some seconds or whatever to help facilitate some things, they could also do so. The Pistons, as having space and being a buyer, makes it so that if you are trying to give Detroit some ammo to go win a title this year, they're set up that you don't have to bring in a third team to dump some contracts on to make some stuff work. Detroit can take the dumps. So we are many, many, many years past when we had more small market owners in the NBA, and teams were trading first round picks to get off of salary. Shout out Derek Favors' salary dump that we are still paying the price for with the top 8 owed protected first round pick to Oklahoma City, which thankfully extinguishes this year. But teams were trading first round picks for salary dumps, and that can happen today, but they have to be big salary dumps. Think Michael Porter Jr. and he had 2 years, $80-ish million left on his deal, and the Nuggets really needed to reshape their roster, and they said, look, what is the drop-off between MPJ and Cam Johnson? Is it really that big? We will trade a first-round pick to Brooklyn to get off of Michael Porter Jr. and take on the lower salary of Cam Johnson. Well, it turns out Porter Jr. is way better than they thought, or anyone thought. And Cam Johnson can't get on the floor, and when he is on the floor, he's just not been very good. So that first-round pick is looking very yikesy because Brooklyn is trying to turn around and trade Michael Porter Jr. because he's been so good for even more first-round picks. So it doesn't mean Utah is not an easy facilitator for a lot of things. Like, there's going to be a lot of teams executing a couple deals where, like, the math doesn't quite right, and Dallas has to dump Dante Exum or something to make a deal work. I just randomly mentioned Dante Exum. That would be very funny if Dante Exum was on the Jazz. Also, he's very hurt right now. He's not going to play the rest of the year. It'd be very fitting for a hurt Dante Exum to be on the Jazz. Just saying. I mentioned a lot that that I'm just very stoked that even if some big names don't come through in the Jazz and in the trade deadline or whatever, that because the Brain Trust is very, very, very active and has relationships throughout the league and is just always on the phone, that Utah is always going to be on everyone's front of mind for quick little salary dumps if needed. And it's not exciting stuff. I'm not trying to overstate our hand here a little bit. But the alternative is getting nothing. And getting little pieces and trading, and eventually you're trading a paperclip for a house, right? And the Jazz have punted away second round picks, and years prior, getting some more second round picks to help out would be easy. So I think the most likely situation is we take on an expiring contract that a team needs to get rid of to get out of the tax. A lot of guys like that. Hunter Tyson fix in my next category. The second most likely is Utah takes on a multi-year salary dump to help a team out. These are higher priced because yes, the Jazz have the space now to take on a guy, but next year when the Jazz are trying to get better, I just mentioned before, spending money on Zeke Naji to not be good is problematic. Now the Nuggets were in a luxury tax situation, so it was way worse. But as the Jazz start to try and get better, having random money out there for bad players, it can be hurtful. So I'm not looking at players with 3, 4, 5 years left on their contract, but teams who have players with 2 years left on their contract, it's harder to offload them than a guy who has an expiring contract. So, especially players with player options that are likely to pick up that player option in a couple years. There are always player options that make you think, like, how the hell did that guy get a player option? One of them is Gershon Yabusele. Yabusele is, you may think, like, positive or negative things about him. He just hasn't been very good for New York, can't get on the floor. He's looked good for Team France recently. Did not have a good start to his career. You're getting Yabusele to... He's got like a player option for $5 million. You're getting him just for the salary dump. You're not getting him because you believe in him. Same thing with Hunter Tyson. I'm a little bit different type of player in this mold as Buddy Hield. I actually think there's a place for Buddy Hield in a Utah rotation next year for 12 minutes, right? 12, 15, 16 minutes. As a pure shooter, like he would have a little bit of value there. Older guy. But that could be a situation where if... I don't think Golden State is keen to give up assets for salary dumps. I think they want to keep everything they have for a bigger move if they got to provide some seconds to sweeten some things up. But I could see them trying to get off of Buddy Hield in connection with a larger deal, and he could end up in Utah if Utah wants to take on some contracts. Third most likely situation. The Jazz take on a super mega multi-year salary dump, leveraging Jusuf Nurkic's $19 million salary and or Kyle Anderson's $8 or so million salary to help a team offload a much, much bigger figure. I don't really have an exact target on this, but I could see teams who may want to aggressively get out of the tax. Actually, I do have a name. For a long, I gotta look up how long his contract goes out. But I'm thinking DeAndre Hunter. Because shout out to the Nate Duncan podcast because he helped me understand this a little bit. And as I look this up, I'm looking up his contract, and it says he plays for the Kings, which means I have to do a live breaking. Okay, so This is a. And this has never happened to me before. Um. Okay, so this is a live breaking trade. This just happened an hour ago, I guess, right as we were starting recording here. The Kings are trading Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder. So Keon Ellis I was going to talk about him as a trade. We've talked about him before as a trade target. Would not be, shouldn't take much to get him. Good little defensive guy. Good. He's a backcourt guy. We got a lot of backcourt guys. He can shoot a little bit. He would be useful for the Jazz. But it seems like Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder are going to the Cavs. DeAndre Hunter goes to the Kings. Dario Saric and 2 second-round picks go to the Chicago Bulls in a 3-team trade. What's not clear to me is who Chicago is sending out. Doesn't seem like the Chicago for touching you. Chicago has to send something to each of the Cavs and the Kings for touching requirements. I'm not sure what's happening here. This is very funny to me that I looked up DeAndre Hunter's contract as a trade idea, and he will not be traded. Well, at least to the Jazz. So the structure I was thinking is like, so he makes $23 million this year, $25 million next year. I mentioned Nurkic, he makes $19 million. The Cavs, because they're in the second apron, their luxury tax per dollar is preposterous. Like one $25 million player is actually like $75 million of tax money or something like that. So like $75 million total of player contract plus tax money based on what level of tax you're in. So the Cavaliers, shout out to the Dan Gilbert for once. You know, he's never been a cheap guy as an owner. He's just kind of a weird bad dude, I guess. As most, if not all of them really are. But if you're not going to be like a S tier championship contender, you just can't be paying this much luxury tax. It's typically just not a smart financial move. Now, I don't care about his money. Nobody should care about these people's money. I'm saying that it becomes likely that an owner says, look, I understand where we are. DeAndre Hunter he got usurped in the rotation by Jalen Tyson, right? Who is an early second round, late first round. I forget exactly when he was drafted by the Cavs. But Jalen Tyson has supplanted DeAndre Hunter. So DeAndre's Hunter contract is just way too expensive. He's got to go. So, figuring out Jusuf Nurkic is matching that with DeAndre Hunter so that Utah's taking on a ton of extra money for next year for a not very good player. Can we get a big asset from Cleveland for that, right? Not necessarily like Jusuf Nurkic doesn't have to play for Cleveland. It could be on a 3-team trade or something like that. So looking forward to seeing the particulars on this one because it doesn't seem like... So the Kings had to give up Keon Ellis. And Dennis Schroeder hasn't exactly been valuable to the Kings, but that's not a super net negative contract. What's Dennis Schroeder's contract? Okay, so he did sign a 3-year, $45 million contract. So that is not a good contract that that Cleveland took back. So it is... That's the asset, is giving up a bad contract, right? It's instead of getting a first round pick or something from a team, sometimes giving up your bad contract is the asset itself. So the Cavs trade a bigger but shorter contract for a lower but longer contract, and they get Keon Ellis in the deal. Somehow Dario Saric ends up with the Chicago Bulls and 2 second-round picks. Whose second-round picks? And, when do they... Yeah, okay. Yeah, Keith Smith says, no word on what they're giving up. The Cavs are waiving Luke Travers because they're acquiring two-way player Emmanuel Miller from the Bulls as the something that the Bulls had to send out to complete this trade. Javon Carter has also been waived. That'd be an interesting little backup guy for Utah. Interesting. Okay. I wonder. Keith Smith is always on top of this stuff. Naquan Tomlin is a two-way player for Cleveland who's been playing very, very good for Cleveland. But you can only play your two-way players X amount of games before you have to convert them to a standard roster spot. Or they can't play anymore. They can't play in the playoffs. And the Cavs don't have an open roster spot to convert Naquan Tomlin. So that'll be an interesting choice they have to make. I believe he's a former Mid-American Conference role player, turning himself into an NBA role player. Look at that. Okay, so we got to wrap up here in a little bit. I just want to mention a few quick things, guys I wanted to talk about real briefly, things I'm thinking about for trades. One is I surfaced this on Blue Sky the other day, and I was heartened to hear that I always like it when a dumb idea I have, some other smarter person picks is coincidentally thinking the same thing, not taking my idea, of course, but just thinking about it. And Nate Duncan also suggested, as I suggested, trading, since Steven Adams is now out for the year and Houston is a championship contender, that they want to shore up their backup center situation or add a good player, because Clint Capella is tangible but washed, right? And I suggested, well, would Houston be interested in swapping Nurkic for Steven Adams? And the idea being that Nurkic is kind of a facsimile of Alperen Şengün, right? Okay, passing big, you can kind of keep the offense humming along. And obviously you're not playing Şengün and Nurkic together, but you can play Nurkic 15 minutes a game and go for a title. Okay. Benefit for Utah is Steven Adams is a really good backup center. To make the money work, though, Houston would also have to send out some money, and I couldn't quite figure it out. I came up with a 3-team machination where Memphis was also involved to take on Clint Capella and some other things. So my idea wasn't great, but what I was surprised to hear the conversation on the Nate Duncan podcast was actually just making the money match by making it Steven Adams and Dorian Finney-Smith. And Finney-Smith was a much ballyhooed acquisition of the Rockets this summer, but he was very hurt and he's been very ineffective when he's been out there, as he's suddenly washed. Houston might have just better rotation options when they get to the playoffs. So the idea of a non-playing Steven Adams and Dorian Finney-Smith is a small little, he might be something he might not be. Veteran guy on a longer contract for a guy who can help you right now in Jusuf Nurkic. And the counter argument was, Steven Adams, we gave him that extension not just for this year, but we think as we as Houston grow and become competitive, even more competitive in future years, Steven Adams is an important longer-term piece of what we do. No commentary on the quality or efficacy of Dorian Finney-Smith. But even a kind of bad Finney-Smith would fit great on Utah's roster as a team who needs big defensive wings. Be an interesting thing. So my idea is I would love to acquire Steven Adams for Jusuf Nurkic if Houston is up for it. I really doubt that they would be so. A guy we've mentioned previously that I really am curious what Denver's going to do here is what they do with Peyton Watson. And I want Utah to be in the mix somewhere on what Denver does with Peyton Watson. The reason I'm so sure that Denver is going to do something with Peyton Watson, and if they don't do something with Peyton Watson, it'll be Christian Brown, is because they just will not. I will be on the floor if they pay both Peyton Watson and Christian Brown basically the same amount of money. If they give Peyton Watson a $30 million a year contract this summer in restricted free agency, I will be on the floor. And keep both of them. I mean, I'm not saying like he's not worth that money. I think, first of all, I think that's a preposterous contract for him, but he has shown an amazing past couple of months. Like Peyton Watson, you think like Cody Williams is turning on a little bit. Peyton Watson is turning into an all-star before our eyes. I think Denver would be insane not to try and keep him and instead try to offload Christian Brown. But of course, we haven't seen, like, Christian Brown plays terrifically with Nikola Jokic, important championship piece. He's growing himself. Like, he's not a bad player. It's just more like Peyton Watson can be like a holy shit player. So Denver's struggle, though, is in exchange for Peyton Watson, they're going to want players who can play right now. And Utah doesn't have anything to give Denver as far as players who can play right now in their championship rotation. We don't have anybody. No, it's not Nurkic. No, it's not Kyle Anderson. And we're not swapping Keontae George for Peyton Watson. You know what I mean? But if Denver is truly terrified, which I think they are, about their roster salary constructs going forward, they're going to want to trade Brown or Peyton Watson to a team in some sort of situation where they could get some real players back. Denver would. And can Utah end up as a third team where Utah is the one giving up some picks, perhaps? Where Utah gives up picks to get Peyton Watson on the team. That's why I'm mentioning this at all. We give up the picks. Peyton Watson comes to us. The picks don't go to Denver. The picks go to a third team who's giving a good player on a more veteran player on a more established timeline than Peyton Watson over to Denver. I would give up fewer picks if it were Christian Brown, but it's just something that I'm thinking about. R.J. Barrett, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. I want to, as I was kind of canvassing some other folks and talking to some people who know more, I don't think R.J. Barrett would cost as much as I was pontificating a couple weeks ago, where I said it would be like 2.5 small assets to get R.J. Barrett. I think it would just take 1.5 or 1 to 1.25 medium assets, like a bad first round pick, which Utah has a lot of bad first round picks. We'll get you R.J. Barrett, and even that just might be too high. I just think it would be a useful spending of our money. But I've completely walked back the idea that if Utah had to pay 2 quality assets to get R.J. Barrett, I think that would be a bad deal. Want to mention Giannis just because he's in the news now that he's formally requested a trade for his first time in his career, and actually he did it in the most baby soft way possible, wishy-washy, passive-aggressive. He's now ready for Milwaukee to start exploring trade offers, right? Which, that again, that's his passive voice way of saying, oh, you can talk to other teams now if you really want to. I'm not demanding a trade. It's just so ridiculous. Look, the reason Utah is out on the Giannis everything is he's got 1 year left on his contract. And he's extension eligible in the fall, right? You would get 1 year of Giannis before you just be like, I'll leave. And so it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Utah to get 1 year of Giannis unless you were able to truly convince him that this was an ascending team worth going for. Because I think Utah obviously has the stuff to give Milwaukee to get Giannis perhaps better than other teams. And if I'm being a crazy neutral fan about this whole thing, or if I'm in Giannis's camp, I should say, and I'm trying to be as neutral as possible, I would suggest to him, like, look, the teams who are willing to trade for you for a title window this year and maybe next year actually aren't all that great, right? Like Miami and Golden State, like they just aren't all that good. San Antonio's probably not interested. Houston has said they're not interested in. Both of those teams would be terrific Giannis fits. They would absolutely bolster their championship credentials this year, next year. But apparently, it's more of like New York and Miami and Golden State. And like, do you really become a championship contender if you have Giannis? Like, I don't think those teams, their meat is good enough. And I think there's a colorable argument to sell Giannis to be like, look, you come to Utah, man, we're not doing shit this year. But next year, this is our lineup. And I think it would become a good playoff team on the same level as those other teams I just mentioned. Maybe not quite like above them, but at the same level. And depending on how much you believe in the rest of the roster and Utah gets a top draft pick or whatever, like it could be attractive. It's not happening. I just wanted to tell a story. Talked a little bit Michael Porter Jr. already. I think that would be an interesting acquisition for Utah. If Brooklyn, I just think it's I think it's odd that Brooklyn is trying to flip Michael Porter Jr. for more picks because they do not own their draft pick next year. And so if I'm Brooklyn, I'm putting the gas pedal down. Like I'm going to try winning games next year. And as I mentioned about Lauri Markkanen, it's a lot easier to win games when you already have the Lauri Markkanen on your team. So I'm surprised if they would just try to get like a first-round pick or whatever for Michael Porter Jr. And if their asking price for Porter Jr., who just has 1 year left on his contract, by the way, after they ate the 1 year of big money and they just have 1 year left, if they're honestly just trading Porter Jr. for one first, man, bring him into Utah, man. I don't think that's a bad deal at all. Now, you got to talk to Porter Jr.'s agencies and everything and be like, look, does he want to extend? At what price does he want to extend? Because the dude's 26, 27 with the longest tail ever of back injuries and ankle injuries. And he's kind of a weird dude. Although in Utah, weird dudes kind of fit the environment, really. If that's the asking price, Utah can afford it. Lots of teams can't. I think Detroit should be all over it. But if the asking price is low enough, I want Utah on the phone. Don't have to talk about Keon Ellis anymore. And finally, 2 weeks ago we did mention Jalen Suggs. He has it's an expensive player right now at $30 million with 3 years left on his contract, but it is a declining contract. And I wasn't super in on Jalen Suggs because of how often he's hurt, and we can't be getting injury-prone guys on this team as we're trying to ascend. But as I watch the Jazz defense just be real painful and real frustrating and real sad, jolting in some real defense in the backcourt to go along with Kessler's return in the front court would mean a lot. I think it would actually instill a lot of defensive improvements to the team. He'd play along terrifically with Keontae, just a hand-in-glove fit right next to Keontae George. Orlando's in a tough spot. They've had kind of a down year from what they expected. Are they trying to do something a little bit more juicy? Desmond Bane did not have the effects on their offense that they were hoping, right? He's been okay. He's improved their offense a little bit. They were hoping for more of an offensive engine and improve their offense from one of the worst, most frustrating offenses in the league to a good offense, and they're just nowhere close. So if they want to juice this offense a little more and get rid of their injury-prone defense-first point guard who has three-point skills and assist skills, and Jalen Suggs is good guy, good guard to have for them on the offensive side of the ball, but he's more of a defense-first guy. Utah should be on those stories, especially because I don't think it would cost too much to acquire him. Long story short, I just don't think the Jazz have a lot of opportunities and ammunition to acquire players in the summer. Sure, off-season trades will be there. We'll see what happens. I think this is an opportunity to bring a guy into the environment that and teach him about like this. This is what we're building here. And before you make a rash decision of what you're going to do next year, I got to spend out an expiring contract year in Utah. This is the worst thing ever. Have a spring and a full off-season with the organization. I think Utah has a better infrastructure than most of these bad teams, where I think they leave a lot of people feeling very impressed about Will Hardy, about the organization. So I'm hoping they are stealth buyers at the deadline. Okay, I have a DeAndre Hunter trade to digest. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching. If you're on the YouTube feed, again, I will improve the acoustics and the visuals next week once we put together this new office. I'm so glad you're here. Drop comments on trade ideas. Hit me up on Blue Sky to say hello. I love talking to all of you about the Jazz, about the NBA. We'll do a whole trade deadline stuff next week. Have a great day. This is Mark for Salt City Hoops.